First panel deals with building an integrated food safety system, what has been done in the past. I mentioned earlier that this is not a brand new idea. Actually, this thing has been talked about for many years, but really became prominent in the late 90s during President Clinton's food safety initiative, and that is when AFTO first offered its vision of an integrated system. To speak about some of these past things and some of the things that are in place right now that really, I think, have impact on public health are, first and foremost, will be Jeff Farah. Jeff Farah is the Director of Intergovernmental Relations and Partnerships with FDA's Office of Foods, where he provides leadership on FDA initiatives to build a national integrated food safety system with state and local governments. And he manages high-level interagency issues at the federal level. Currently serves as an AFTO advisor and was formerly the chief of food safety program at California State Health Services. Ron Klein is currently the AFTO program manager, where he leads a number of integration efforts, including the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Alliance. He also manages the cooperative agreement with the Association of Public Health Labs and the American Association of Feed Control Officials to advance laboratory accreditation. And he also manages our cooperative agreement with FDA to provide grant funding to state and local agencies to improve their retail regulatory program performance. And he's a former program manager for the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, Food Safety, and Sanitation Program. Steve Mandernack is currently the Bureau Chief for the Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals Food and Consumer Safety Bureau. He is also currently the Vice President of the Association of Food and Drug Officials and the co-chair of that association's Laws and Regulations Committee. And he also serves as the current chair for the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Alliance. And finally, Travis Goodman worked with the Hamilton County Health Department, the Indiana State Department of Health Food Protection Program, and also completed a detail with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security prior to coming to FDA's Office of Partnerships in 2010. Travis has worked to assist states in further developing and sustaining their rapid response capabilities as part of FDA's mission and ongoing initiatives regarding federal-state integration and building an integrated food safety system. I think Jeff is going to start.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Just to get a flavor for who is in the audience, can just have a brief show of hands. How many folks in the audience would consider yourselves regulatory? Raise your hand. Good number. How many industry? Strong turnout. Consumers? Good. And university? Quite a good mix. Thank you for self-identifying there. As you've seen, this presentation, the whole structure is set up to understand a little bit more about the integrated food safety system, starting with what's happened in the past, where we are now, and where we plan to go. That's the general approach here. So we're starting with where we've been, the history. And when many of us hear a talk coming about history, some of our eyes glaze over a little bit. Let's just be honest, some of us do. However, there are a few people that love the History Channel and really get into it. I see a few of you out there. All right. So instead of making this another boring history presentation, we've decided to change it completely on advice from Joe Corby. We have set this talk to a rap song. And we're going to have Joe Corby and Steve Solomon come up and do a little dancing while I do the rap. Joe, Steve, would you come on up? No? They have backed out on me. I had a firm agreement this morning, apparently. Maybe Joe will dance later at the reception. It's happened before, hasn't it? Oh, God. So let me make sure I can find my way around this thing. So many of you are familiar with the concept of an integrated food safety system. You've heard a little bit about it from Mike and Joe. Some of you may not be too familiar with it, and you may be asking yourself some questions. Well, what is all this about? You know, I've heard the concept about integration. Really, how do we get there? And, you know, who started this, and when, where did it start, and what's been done, and all that good stuff. So you've got to have a lot of questions about that. And that's a little bit about what we're going to try and answer for you during these presentations. There are a lot of definitions of what an integrated food safety system is. Many of you have your own. In summary, it's folks working together, coordination, collaboration to get things done in the area of food safety. That's it in a nutshell. A little more elaborate definitions here on the screen: public health and regulatory partners working collaboratively across jurisdictions to provide that comprehensive, coordinated coverage. But basically, boiling it down, it's everyone working together. How do we get there? Well, again, it gets back to several key words: consistency, coordination, collaboration being several of those key words. It's achieving that integrated food safety system through several steps that are painfully obvious to us all. It's having a set of consistent national standards that we all aspire to and we all work towards in a meaningful way. It's jointly developing training and certification programs for all our inspectors to make sure we get the same training, the same topics at the same time. It's ensuring that we have food laboratory accreditation at the highest level. So when we get a result from a local, state, or a federal accredited lab, we have confidence in those findings. Again, consistency, coordination. And on a daily basis, it's implementing these sub-elements at the bottom, day in and day out, making sure these happen. It's doing the joint work planning. Who's going to inspect what facility? It's using the same risk ranking criteria or similar risk ranking criteria. It's sharing our inventories, coordinating who went out of business, who moved, who changed names, who inspected what firm last, what those inspection results were. Doing joint inspections where appropriate for really complex facilities, for facilities that may have had problems in the past. We can and do coordinate joint inspections. That should be part of our everyday work. Developing joint enforcement and compliance teams. An easy concept, and we are integrating that concept into our daily work. But ensuring that both, and where appropriate, local, state, and federal regulators are looking at these issues where compliance or enforcement may be needed as a last resort, to coordinate and use our authorities strategically. A state or local jurisdiction may have better short-term authority to hold product, to put processes in place. A federal agency may have better long-term authority. But having those discussions day in and day out about how do we get this firm into compliance when appropriate. Again, practicing responses, coordinating responses, training for responses together, being prepared for those. You'll hear hopefully a little bit about rapid response teams as an example of integration. I personally think it's one of the best examples we have of people coming together, talented people working together to respond to these critical events in a timely manner. After those events, looking back, what could we have done differently? How can we do it better the next time? A system of consistency and collaboration. Immediately notifying our partners when we see a situation where there are egregious conditions, putting our heads together. What did we find? What did we see? What should our next step be? And joint planning and implementation of our surveillance efforts to get more data on the risk posed by certain commodities. Why do we need this system? Why weren't things working well before? What wasn't working well before? Well, at the 1998 meeting in Kansas City, kind of a milestone, if you will, the participants there identified quite a few reasons for an integrated food safety system and working better together. Many of those are listed here. Many of them were painfully obvious to those of us who were at that meeting. And by the way, anyone else here other than Joe, who I think's been around forever, since time began, and myself, anyone else at that 1998 meeting in Kansas City? Doug and Bill and quite a few others. That's great. I thought most of us had died. Or retired. But there were a lot of reasons to work together in a more systematic, more coordinated way. We needed national standards. We needed common, uniform laboratory practices. We needed more uniformity and consistency, as we hear from industry, on a daily basis in how we inspect food facilities. We didn't have a well-constructed training plan for our state and federal workforce. Our communication at times was slow, it was sporadic, and inconsistent in exchanging information. Occasionally, we had some duplication of effort. We would run into FDA and state inspectors at the same facility, or the day after, or the week after. So there was a lot of room for improvement in our system back in 1998. The benefits, when you look conceptually at an integrated food safety system, are obvious. The bottom line at the bottom page is increased public health protection. But obviously, those benefits listed above apply, and you could go on and on. It's easy to document the benefits of working together, especially in a regulatory environment. As Joe and Mike and others will continue to remind you today, integration is not a new topic. It's not a new term. It's been around a long time. Joe was sharing an iced tea with me last night. Is that all right, Joe, to call it iced tea? All right, good. And reminding me that in his review of a lot of the history of the integrated food safety system, one particular note that he put forward was in 1938 in the old Association of Food and Drug Officials meeting minutes, Vice President Woodward, Vice President of AFTA Woodward from Connecticut, used the term and summarized the need for integration back in 1938. So it's not a new term. There have been examples there for many decades of working together, of documenting the need to do more in this area. So prior to the 90s, certainly there was work on integration going on, but not in a national, consistent, standardized way. During the 1990s, again, that work continued. There were certainly pockets of coordination and integration. But as Joe mentioned, in 1998 was probably one of the more critical milestones in the integrated food safety system. FDA and states came together at the first 50-state workshop in Kansas City. That was associated with the launch of the National Food Safety Initiative, and there was some success from that meeting. There was a lot of great discussion. I remember parts of that discussion very well. A lot of good ideas came forward. However, that effort was not sustained at that time. There was not the momentum behind it to keep it moving forward. Although work was being done, systematically we didn't sustain that for several years. I do want to mention a practical example of integration that occurred in around 2003, 2004. How many of you heard of CalFIRT? A few of you have. My previous life as Chief of the Food and Drug Branch of the California Department of Health Services worked closely with FDA districts in the north and south of California. Barbara Cassins, who you'll hear from, was later was District Director in San Francisco. Alonzo Cruz, District Director in Los Angeles. Pat Kinley, who you'll hear from, was in charge of our food safety section at the California Department of Health at that time. Over the years, prior to 2003, 2004, we had a number of leafy green outbreaks, if you recall. Quite a few outbreaks that tied back to production in California. And what we ran into as we investigated those outbreaks was, in many ways, lack of coordination, lack of communication. We would run into each other at the facilities without a coordinated plan of how to investigate. So after several of these responses, Barbara, Pat, Lanza, and I got together, and after some chewings from some industry folks saying, you guys have to do better at this, we got together and said, how can we coordinate? How can we make this system work? Because we're going to be doing this again, in all probability, given the history. So we put our good, talented, smart people in the room and said, figure this out. Figure out how we can train, how we can respond, how we can look at these events after the fact. That unification of state and federal response teams became known as CALFIRT, California Food Emergency Response Team, which was the prototype for many of the rapid response teams that you'll hear more about later today. Again, putting people in the room, training, talking together, getting to know each other so you don't have to do this on a Friday night or Saturday morning and make introductions and figure it all out at the facility. Again, 2008, we talked about that critical milestone. It sort of re-energized our efforts around integration. And from that, the term Partnership for Food Protection was born. You're going to hear a lot more about PFP today. Don't want to steal that thunder. But a coordinating committee for the PFP, Partnership for Food Protection, as part of these 50 state workshops with local, state, federal regulators, was developed, as were various work groups to complete projects, including IT, training and certification, emergency response, and risk-based work planning. Again, you'll hear much more about the details of this later. That meeting was held in St. Louis. Many of the people in the room were at that meeting as well. Again, milestones continue to happen on a yearly basis. The White House Food Safety Working Group issued a report in 2009 emphasizing the need for integration. FDA drafted a vision paper that was supported by the Partnership for Food Protection. Decision was made to hold the 50-state workshops every 2 years to keep the momentum going around this collaboration. So in 2010, the third workshop was held, and the administration at that time supported the concept of an integrated food safety system by budgeting money to help build infrastructure to support that concept. But as you know, and as Mike has said, passage of FSMA in 2011 mandated our approach to an integrated food safety system and validated the work we had been doing over many years, but required us to do that. And FDA welcomed that mandate, by the way. Required us to leverage the work done by state, local partners, required us to look at the infrastructure, state, local programs, and to work to strengthen that infrastructure. Many of you know about FSMA. One of the key themes, as I mentioned, is enhancing partnerships. We take that requirement very seriously. Moving along to 2012, our fourth workshop. Just to give you an idea of the flavor of what these workshops are like, we had over 200 attendees, local, territorial, state, federal agencies, and associations. These 50-state workshops were gaining momentum in 2012. We had a system, we have a process to make these work groups work better, work smoothly, to get full-scale input collaboration into these. Out of that 2012 meeting came recommendations for critical components of an integrated food safety system that eventually helped shape our vision paper, our strategic plan for an integrated food safety system. That 50-state workshop was held in Nashville, in my home state of Tennessee, an incredibly well-attended meeting. Also, at about this same time, FDA made some major changes to support, not only in words, not only in funding, but in organizational structure, to support the concept of an integrated food safety system. From the Office of Foods, which Mike directs, he created a Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Partnerships senior position. It's a position that I hold, working with many of my colleagues that you'll hear from today in FDA. In the Office of Regulatory Affairs, they created an Office of Partnerships from the old Division of Federal-State Relations. Barbara Cassins is the acting director of that office, who you'll hear from later. Also added a senior advisor for federal-state relations, created district and state liaisons, and added emergency response coordinators. We created a new PFP governance structure and governance council that included deputy-level directors from across FDA. Also included representatives from state and local agencies. We also added dedicated project managers. The scope of the PFP and the work groups was getting large. Our participants are volunteers. They have full-time jobs. We needed project managers to help manage the logistics of these efforts. This further enhanced and solidified this relationship and our efforts, elevated the leadership and management to senior level. In 2013, Manufactured Food Program Regulatory Standards Alliance was created. You've heard a lot about the Manufactured Food Program standards, 10 national standards to make state and federal inspection programs more consistent. This alliance was created to provide a mechanism to get feedback on the standards, to tell FDA what's working, what's not working with the standards, what can be done better or differently to get the outcome desired. Recently, that group came together in San Diego and offered some feedback on some suggested changes to those standards. Those changes are being considered and reviewed currently. 40 states are now working in this arena toward having full compliance with these 10 national standards. One state, Wisconsin, recently achieved full compliance with those standards. Other states are very close. These standards include areas like training, regulatory law, response, labs, and other areas that you'll hear more about. In 2014, we held our 5th workshop that resulted in a PFP strategic vision document. And also, we documented that over $60 million in grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts were flowing to states to help support the concept of an integrated food safety system. Again, no longer words, no longer concepts, but reality. You're going to hear a lot more about PFP, integrated food safety system, how do those fit together. For now, just understand that PFP is a vehicle. It's a major vehicle, but it's one vehicle to help us achieve this integrated system. Indeed, our new vision includes words like mutual reliance, includes collaboration, coordination, sharing, and solving problems. It also includes the term educate before and during the regulation process, as you heard Mike mention. Our past commissioner, Commissioner Hamburg, said it very well, talking about strengthening our collaboration with other agencies and leveraging the expertise and resources of our colleagues. None of us individually have the resources, have the expertise, but together we can go much further. Do we have all the answers? We absolutely do not yet. You've heard about the need to figure out how industry, how consumers tie into this integrated food safety system, how they become incorporated. We are beginning to look at how we measure our progress and metrics. A very difficult process and procedure, but we're beginning to grapple with that. And really identifying what our next key points are in this continuum towards an integrated food safety system. So with that, I'll stop and turn it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Yes. Were you driving? Okay. How's this? Oh, great. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of FDA cooperative agreements that are having a positive impact on integration. And while this is, in a sense, is a review of the past, these are agreements, a couple of agreements. I think we're about year 4 for both of them, and they're nuts and bolts, and they're both having a real positive impact on working with folks that are regulating food on a day-to-day basis in developing collaborative approaches and capacity building. The first is the AFTO Alliance for an Integrated Food Safety System, and the second is the APHL AFTO-AFCO Laboratory Accreditation Cooperative Agreement. And through these cooperative agreements, FDA is supporting activities which are assisting the food and feed regulatory programs with the capacity to participate in the integrated food safety system, achieve and maintain program standards, and work with the participants to leverage resource and facilitate mutual alliance to protect public health from foodborne illness. A key part of the AFTO Alliance for an Integrated Food Safety System is the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Alliance, which Jeff briefly described. I'm not going to go into any really detail on that because that's what Steve Manderdak is going to talk about. It's really one of our big success stories and a key activity. Other elements of the Alliance Agreement include those related to research and information transfer to support capacity development, achieving program standards and consistent approaches for regulatory food safety. Other program standards include the retail food program standards, which Joe mentioned. We administer a grant for FDA, which is a separate instrument where we provide, on a competitive basis, resources to state and local retail food programs for training and meeting the National Voluntary Retail Food Program standards. We undertake research as needed to identify regulations, guidance, and best practices from our at the state and local level, which we then disseminate through our regulatory program portal, which is available online at www.afto.org to all food regulatory staff have access to that. And we also include the topical index for laws and guidance, where we identify for various subject areas, including dairy, manufactured food, seafood, cottage food. We've listed by state the regulations and guidance that are available, and that is an open access resource available through our resources tab on the AFTO webpage. You don't have to be a regulator to view that. Other areas that we do is, as our members have questions on specific issues such as license fees or what folks are doing for surveillance sampling, we have the ability to send out very simple SNAP surveys where we can elicit that information and then post that information on our Food Protection Program portal for our regulatory members so they can find out what other states are doing so that they can answer questions or have leads for developing programs that they've been asked to develop based upon the experiences of others. We're also completing a FSMA-related comprehensive survey on capacity of states and locals to meet requirements, pending requirements under FSMA. We've surveyed 79 state jurisdictions and 1,027 local jurisdictions. We're hoping to have that report, that data has been analyzed and is being assembled in a report. We should have that issued in June. Another document that we've prepared, another research project that we've done in the past, is a resource survey of the states. We anticipate it was last done, I believe, in 2008. We're planning on redoing that next year, and again, that results are available on our webpage. We provide outreach to industry and consumer group on integration issues. This workshop is an example of that. And identify regulatory training needs and work with agencies and FDA to develop training strategies to meet the training requirements of our regulatory workforce. We also maintain an up-to-date directory of state and local officials, which is available as an open access resource on our webpage. We update that twice a year. And so if you want to know who in a particular state is responsible for food or epidemiology or law, drinking water, environmental issues, we have that information available through our directory. Plus we have links to other associations and information sources like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the United States Department of Agriculture. We keep links to information on standards implementation specialists for FDA. So again, I encourage you to take a look at that and use that as a resource. Our second implementation-oriented cooperative agreement is one that is related to building an integrated laboratory system. And through Section 202 of FSMA, Congress recognized the need for laboratories to meet and become accredited to model standards to provide assurance that analytical testing produces results that will support food safety decisions, that we've got good science behind those results that we're using to conduct surveillance, investigate foodborne outbreaks, undertake compliance activities or enforcement activities. We need good data. This is a project that is the Association of Public Health Laboratories is the primary contractor for this cooperative agreement, and they're working with AFTO and the American Association of Feed Control Officials. We're partners in the implementation of this agreement. And it really is a great example of how FDA regulatory associations can collaborate to assist the laboratories who are responsible for supporting the food and feed programs to achieve and maintain and enhance their standards. We support both the laboratories that have cooperative agreements, individual cooperative agreements with FDA to develop their ISO accreditation programs, as well as those that do not have cooperative agreements. And the intent of that is to facilitate mutual reliance for analytical results, whether they're reported by a state, local, or federal laboratory. And this will eliminate the need to duplicate sampling and will facilitate quicker action on sampling results to protect public health. So these are the elements of the cooperative agreement. Some of the specific activities that related to designing, documenting, and delivering and management and implementing support programs are: we have an accreditation discussion board, online searchable document repository. We are working with unfunded laboratories. As far as pilot testing and implementing national policies and procedures, one area that we're very active in is developing guidance on obtaining defensible samples. The sampling design is really critical to ensuring that you're gathering samples and submitting for analysis and spending money on analysis that can be used to support the decisions that you need to make. It's one of the key expectations of FSMA Section 202 is to address not just the analytical issues, but the sampling issues. And the sampling issues are really a partnership between the laboratories and the programs, because the laboratories do the analysis and the programs are the ones that develop the sampling plans and actually go out there and do the sampling and the investigations. We're developing national models for rapid sharing and acceptance of laboratory data. We've got a user group. And as far as implementing a national framework, we have a lab manager steering committee within AFTO that provides advice and input on training needs, and it provides a technical advisor to the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Alliance to serve as a liaison between the laboratories and the regulatory programs on program operations, as well as developing the recommended changes to Standard 10 laboratory support of the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program standards. This year we had for the first time, we had a joint meeting between the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Alliance and the Governmental Food and Feed Laboratory Accreditation meeting, where we provided an opportunity for networking and exploring issues of joint concern. It was two separate meetings, but we held a joint session, and it was a success, and we will be doing that again next year. We also are doing one significant activity is we're building a laboratory curriculum framework for food and feed labs. Through that, we're identifying the content areas and the competencies required for staff in order to do their jobs, from the entry level through the leadership level. And those competencies will be used to identify the necessary training, as well as drive the development of new training. This is a project that is analogous to the National Curriculum Framework for the regulatory staff. So I'm here all week. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me or stop by AFTO has a booth where I'll be able to provide more information on any of these issues. So, thank you. Travis?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about another cooperative agreement you haven't heard about. Well, you heard a little from Jeff about it, the Rapid Response Team's cooperative agreement from FDA, and also about the Partnership for Food Protection, and in particular the Surveillance Response and Post-Response Work Groups activity. So this is going to be more about integrating a response as a piece of building an integrated food safety system. So a little bit about the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the past and kind of a vision for the future, but really going to spend more time about the present and what we've got going on now. The first thing I want to say about the past is we're always learning, so I don't think we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past in response. And we're doing a lot better job now of focusing on prevention, taking lessons learned and doing after-action reporting in post-response mode and trying to cycle those things back into prevention and educational efforts. But in the past, a couple high-profile outbreaks really led to some change at the national level and allowed some funding for FDA to spend on investing in state infrastructure and building integration when it comes to response. The first big one really was the E. coli and spinach in 2006. The spinach industry was hit really hard. There was a problem with the trace back and getting back to the farm that was responsible for the outbreak, so it really impacted the spinach industry as a whole, which we don't want to see happen. We want to really try to do a better job at response and getting back to where it happened and working with those folks. Also, right after that, on the heels of that, in 2007, we had the botulism in chili sauce and the Castleberry's chili sauce. That was also a troubled response in that we had the local folks going out, doing a recall audit checks, trying to get that contaminated product out of commerce. We had the state folks doing the same and FDA doing the same. We're all tripping over each other. So there's a lot of lessons learned from these, and we knew we needed to do a lot better job in the future. And so some of our consumer and industry partners voiced their concerns to Congress, which actually was good for us because it freed some funding up for us to let out some cooperative agreements to work together, integrate our response efforts, and get more effective at what we do in the future. So in the past, there's been very little funding available for integrating response and funding from the federal government to states to build response efforts and dedicate staff to just response. Most folks kind of did response as a side item. If something came up, they got diverted away from routine inspection work to go respond to foodborne illness outbreaks or natural disasters or whatever the trouble of the day is. So, talking about the present, we have a 3-year cooperative agreement program called the Rapid Response Team Cooperative Agreements. It focuses on building multi-jurisdictional, multidisciplinary teams among food regulators, environmental health specialists, epidemiologists, and laboratorians. It's a significant investment from the agency. We've got 18 states that receive the grants. I'll show you a map of where they're receiving them here in a minute. But it's over a $5 million a year cooperative agreement to states. And then also I'll talk about, like I mentioned previously, the Partnership for Food Protection's work to bring a very broad group together of food regulators, epidemiologists, and laboratorians to work on projects that will also enhance response and integration moving forward. So this is a map of where our rapid response teams are. Like I said, there's 18 states that receive the cooperative agreements. They're supported by 14 FDA district offices. The districts hire, as you saw on Jeff's slide, emergency response coordinators, which are really the boots on the ground that work with the state and local folks that are going out responding to these foodborne illness outbreaks or other events. And also the district management supports those efforts in coordination between the state and FDA. The ones in green are the ones that started in our program in 2008, 2009. So they've been in the program a while, and it was such a successful effort that in 2012 we doubled the size of the program and brought on 9 more RRTs for a total of 18. Those are the states in blue. And we actually assigned them mentors. We assigned one of the existing RRTs that came in first to one of the new rapid response teams, so it allowed them to kind of pass along their lessons learned about developing their teams, building relationships, developing plans and procedures to the new RRTs, which effectively allowed them to stand up a lot quicker than what we call the original RRTs that started back in 2008, 2009. So this is our logo. We, of course, focus on the old 3-legged stool approach: food regulatory, environmental health, epidemiology, and laboratory, and the links between them. But we also make sure that the FDA district is included as a leg of the stool in these multidisciplinary teams, and the feed programs, because we look at food as feed, and if we've got issues in one, we've probably got issues in the other. And here's kind of the goal of the cooperative agreement program. Improve the effectiveness of multi-jurisdictional food and feed emergency responses with the ultimate objective of reducing the time from agency notification to implementation of effective control measures. So from the time we're notified there's a problem, we got to get more and more effective, faster and faster at finding out what happened. How to do it, working together on the joint investigation, working together on the trace back, and once we find out where the contamination is, trace forward of where the product might have went, putting effective control measures or mitigation strategies in place in conjunction with our industry partners, and recalling and pulling all that contaminated product out of commerce. And we also capture best practices along the way, and we share them with our Rapid Response Team's Best Practices Manual. So some bonus outcomes besides our overall goal of this program is to improve integrated response. We want to avoid duplication. We don't want to, like Jeff gave the example of at a firm, there's some problem and, the county folks show up and the state folks show up and FDA shows up. We're really trying to get better at work planning and coordinating that, not just in routine work, but on the response side as well. And then we want to synergize resources. So we want to leverage each other's resources. We want to know what each other's strengths are. A lot of times states, for instance, can do holds, embargoes, seizures of food faster than we can at FDA, so we want to leverage that ability if need be, and know what our strengths are so we can leverage each other's strengths and leverage each other's resources to make sure we're using their resources wisely. Also, like I said, rapidly identifying and controlling the contamination of the source to restore consumer confidence. We want to mitigate any negative economic impacts that the firm might have or that might have on the food supply overall, and restore the continuity of operations within the affected firms. And we also have some RRTs that are working on building some training around recovery modules to share they're doing that along with academia to share with the industry. So we're excited about those educational efforts as well. And also we focus on continuous improvement. So I mentioned we have after-action meetings between all the response partners. We share what went well, what didn't go well, what were our lessons learned, so we can really take note of that and try to cycle that back into prevention and education efforts. This is our Rapid Response Team Best Practices Manual. The 2013 edition is available upon request if you email us at FDA, or AFTO has posted it on their website. If you go to afto.org and click Resources, you can download a PDF copy of it. The current RRT manual has 14 chapters. So if you do download the PDF, I'll just caution you, it's 550 pages, so don't just hit print right off the bat. You might want to kind of look through that a little bit. We're excited, too, because it's a biennial revision process, and we're opening it right now for revisions based on some lessons learned. We're going to tweak some chapters to reflect things that we know how to do better now. And we're also going to add a 15th chapter on exercises, because we do require, under the cooperative agreement, every 3 years we'll go into different type of exercises and focus on those types of exercises, so these RRTs are ready for whatever comes at them, not just routine foodborne illness outbreaks, but the possibility of intentional contamination or response to large-scale natural disasters, or other things like power outages and things of that nature. So here's some success stories. I'll just briefly share a little bit about these with you. These are all integrated RRT response efforts where we had the district and the state and sometimes local folks working on these teams together. We had 2011, we had Salmonella agona in papaya. It was a successful trace back by the Texas RRT partners. 2011, again, we had E. coli and 0157H7 and hazelnuts with 4 RRTs involved in that response. Michigan, Minnesota, California, CalFIRT, and Wisconsin. And they actually published an article in the Journal of Food Protection about that you can find that it's available. And by the way, before I forget, if you want more information and in-depth and more of these success stories, if you go to fda.gov and just type in the search Rapid Response Teams, it'll pull up our webpage on FDA's website, and it'll have a bunch of success stories like these detailed on the links to these journal articles on there. And also CORE, the FDA Coordinated Outbreak Response and Evaluation Network, mentioned the RRTs on their web page on the fda.gov as well. In 2012, we had salmonella in diamond pet food based on some sampling that the feed program in Michigan was doing that led to a large national scale recall. In 2013, we had cyclospora, which was something relatively new, but it seems to be popping up more and more in bagged salad mix and cilantro. And we had 2 concurrent separate outbreaks at the same time with 2 rapid response teams activated, both the Iowa and Texas RRTs responding to that one. And in 2014, we had Listeria and soft Mexican cheeses in Maryland and Virginia, and that was also a successful trace back to the firm, which was actually in Pennsylvania. There was Listeria samples from retail outlets, and then the firm, the traceback converged on the firm in Philadelphia. Then we had the Philadelphia district office and the state health and ag folks in Philadelphia go to the firm, and they found some bad stuff at the firm and some bad sampling at the firm as well. But it was a successful outcome, I think, because we were able to do a trace back quickly and get a lot of that product right out of commerce. In 2015, we had the Listeria and caramel apples, which that was just right around Christmas. Pat's very familiar with that. We had California, Missouri, and Minnesota RRTs involved in that outbreak. Strange, we hadn't had one quite like that before. Did a lot of sampling and traced back on the apples, tested the apples, the caramel, the sticks that go on the apples, all these different things, but it turns out it was the apples, and Pat's team ended up getting back to them, traced back to the farm, and getting some positive sample results at the farm, and now I think that farm's working on those issues, and they're, I think, on the fence as to whether they're going to reopen again. So another thing I want to talk about is the PFP Surveillance Response and Post-Response Work Group. That's a group within the Partnership for Food Protection that's really charged with developing projects that align with the PFP strategy, that the outcome of these projects would be coordination and moving response efforts toward integration and building an integrated food safety system. It includes typical partners, regulatory, epi, and lab folks, and we've currently got 7 projects underway. These are the 7 projects we're currently working on. Quick Start Job Aids, which are job aids when they're finalized that we're going to share. That we've got response experts to put together these flow charts for anybody that's really not very familiar with response on what do you need to do in an initial part of an investigation for a foodborne illness outbreak. And we got the 3 flow charts to share with them on the food regulatory side. These are some things you ought to do. On the epi side, these are some things you ought to do. On the lab side, these are some things you ought to do. So we're excited to get that out soon. We also have Food Shield best practices. So Food Shield's a web-based collaboration portal where we can share response information between response partners in real time and upload documents. Saves us a lot of time rather than going back and forth via email. And so we've developed some best practices. A lot of this is really around doing consistent nomenclature and naming things so we know that whoever's using the work groups in Food Shield, whether they be local, state, or federal, we're talking about the same thing and we're getting the same data back when we look at these things and evaluate our responses. A district, state, and a cooperative recall plan. We're developing some best practices around recalls between local, state, and federal, and also some recommendations for improving the recall system overall. We've got a model food emergency response framework where we're looking at the national standards for response in the manufactured food regulatory program standards, the retail standards, and the feed standards. And usually it's standard 5, the response standards within those national standards, and saying, are we missing anything? Are there gaps here? Are there things we need to do better and bring up to the standards bodies like the CFP or the MIFRIP's Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Standards Alliance to improve standard 5 in future versions. We've got the RRT capacity development, and this is specifically a document we've worked on between the RRTs of how do you respond better and more effectively, how do you incrementally build capacity and relationships with these teams, and it's basically passing on the lessons learned from the RRT best practices and what we found in the RRT program to folks that weren't the benefit of an RRT grant or cooperative agreement from FDA, but still want to stand teams up. And I know a lot of them are really, now we've got a lot of momentum, a lot of people we've got about 8 states that are chomping at the bit to get a grant and get up and running, so we don't want to leave them since we haven't had new funding opportunities open up. We want to give them what we've learned already. We're just pulling out any mention of funding or timelines because they're going to be doing this on their own time, on their own dime, so to speak. Improving information sharing. This is going to be a multi-year project between all the PFP stakeholders. Sit down and think about the roles and responsibilities, who does what when during response, how can we be more effective, clarify roles so everybody knows what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, and share information more effectively during a response. And lastly, the Library of Response Resources. So this won't be, PFP doesn't intend to be a one-stop shop for response. It's just that we're going to try to identify everywhere in the food safety system that we know there are response resources and put that one place so you can link out to all those from this PFP webpage or whatever mechanism we decide in the end to share it. And those are a couple of the new projects we're working on moving forward. So this is just an example of the Quick Start job aids. It's probably hard to read, but it kind of talks at the top about what do you need to do in the first place for initial investigation of a problem, and it gets more into the details below of what do you do in these different areas, EPI and lab and food regulatory. So, and it's got several flow charts, but I couldn't screenshot all those on one slide. So the future, and I'll just say this is, this is my future, so Dr. Solomon, don't shoot me. This is my vision for the future, for integration, for response, based on these success stories and these things we're seeing with the RRTs. So I think really, and Jeff said it earlier, fully integrated response equals togetherness. All response partners have to have trusted relationships, respect one another, leverage each other's strengths. Government response partners jointly need to train together, develop plans and procedures together, conduct investigations together, sample together, initiate control measures together, coordinate recalls and conduct after-action reports and develop lessons learned together. And also work with industry and academia to leverage your strengths. You bring the subject matter expertise to the table and cycle what we learned back into prevention and education efforts to prevent similar food incidents from occurring. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you.
Well, we can make this simple and say ditto, but we might have to yet. I just wanted to talk a little bit, begin with a good example of how integration has worked at the state level in Iowa. 5 years ago this week, I was reassigned to be the Director of Food and Consumer Safety out of working in our legislative and policy branch. Kind of an interesting shift. But also, I will tell you, it was 3 months before I had a conversation related to manufactured foods with the Food and Drug Administration. Today, every day, I'm having a conversation with our district staff about something related to manufactured foods. It would be rare if there is not a week where our staff are not working together in the field on some related challenge in a plant or facility. That is a really dramatic shift in 5 years. So I really have to say the integration is happening on the ground every day. But let's talk program standards for a few minutes. In my world, what we are doing is the Manufactured Food Regulatory Program Standards Alliance, or Regulatory Program Alliance, sorry. We don't just do program standards. And for example, a good example of what's happening is we have now 40 programs in 39 states participating in the program standards. Those states are actively working toward full implementation of those standards. When we look in about 3 years, virtually all of them will be at near or full conformance with program standards. Right now, one is at full conformance. 5 years ago, none were at full conformance. It's a pretty amazing shift in, once again, a very, very short period of time. I would also note that when we look at the states that aren't enrolled, you're thinking, okay, there's 39 states enrolled, there's 50 states. Where we have states not enrolled tend to be the least populated states where there's not a lot of manufactured food facilities, and often they do not have manufactured food programs. So think of North Dakota and South Dakota and some of those states, particularly up there, that have very small populations and limited manufacturing. So there is some reasons why that happens. Well, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what the program standards do and what the Manufactured Food Program Standard Alliance has been working on for the last, since really standing up in 2013. Our first charge is always to make recommendations to the FDA as it relates to program standards for manufactured food programs. Secondly, we hold an annual opportunity for programs to share information and best practices along with collaborate with their FDA colleagues. And third, we work to solicit feedback that can help improve the manufactured food regulatory system. So whether that be at the state level, or how do we work together better at a federal level, or how do we see system challenges that need to be addressed. All of those things really are resulting in things that many of you in this room, as the regulated community, are seeing positive impact. So whether that be we do a more coordinated method of inspections, our inspections look similar, or our scheduling of inspections works better so that, once again, we don't overlap times, places where we don't schedule in the same year oftentimes now inspections. So those sort of things are areas where we're really working together, and we're seeing real results. Organizationally, we have a board of state representatives with 7 members, 6 that are regional state representatives and 1 at large. We have several technical advisors from the FDA and also 1 representing state food laboratories. And we have a chair and co-chair that serve at 1-year terms, with the co-chair becoming the chair the succeeding year. The standards we heard a little bit about earlier, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about what they look like for a regulatory program. There are 10 standards. This is one of 3 sets of program standards out there. We have manufactured foods, animal feed that were introduced about a year ago, and then the retail food program standards have been out there, 11 years, 12 years or so, been out there a little while longer. All are very similar in lots of ways. There are 9 in retail, 10 in manufactured foods, and 11 in animal feed. They look very similar, other than perhaps there's a little bit of variation between them related to their specific program areas. In fact, in the first 9 standards, they are identical in their topic, at least, if not their form. So the first standard for everyone is regulatory foundations. It's really a key to know what your regulations are and how they compare on the manufactured foods level with the federal regulations. So it's really an inventory standard of knowing your regulatory environment. The second piece of the puzzle is training and education, including continuing education for our inspectional staff. That is something that I think all of us at the state level have seen huge advancement of our inspectional staff. And I will tell you that a manufactured food inspector 5 years ago in Iowa basically had some on-the-job training, perhaps 5 or 6 joint inspections, and then good luck. And now that's a very different process. It takes us typically 2 years to get them to where they're independent. And that would not be necessarily unusual situation. That's a huge change. Standard 3 relates to risk-based inspectional programs and really sets out the inspectional system, the protocols for your state, developing those formalized policies and procedures. Once again, a lot of us lived in a verbal tradition of teaching our inspectional expectations to our inspectors without having much in writing. This is really putting your policies and procedures for inspections in writing. And then we move on to Standard 4, which is really a quality assurance program, making sure that what you've put in writing is indeed what you're doing, and auditing your staff against the policies and procedures that you have in writing. Standard 5 is really probably Travis knows this, one of my favorites, foodborne illness and response. This is one that, in my mind I couldn't spend enough time on every day if I could make it, the day 40 hours a day instead of 24. But it is one that, is huge for us. And there again, it's a lot about knowing how to work with your partners. Foodborne illnesses don't take place in a vacuum that's just the regulatory community. You have to work with your public health officials, your local agencies, the state, other states, the federal government, sometimes multiple agencies in the federal government. They're complex, and figuring out how to do that working relationship and having some of those standard operating procedures are just key in that process. Standard 6 is compliance and enforcement. Which there again, moving to that standardized policies and procedures for, and then also ensuring that you're following those policies and procedures related to compliance and enforcement. Standard 7, industry and community relations, making sure that you're doing outreach activities with both your industry and your consumer groups, and you're documenting those activities going forward. Standard 8 is program resources, knowing where your gaps are, communicating those gaps to leadership of the state level, and making sure that they are understanding what challenges those are presenting, whether it be, many times it's not even as much funding as needed as it is attention needed to make some regulatory changes or those sorts of things. Standard 9 is what I would call the program evaluation standard. So it's really the self-assessment work to make and to make sure you know where you're at in conformance with the standards, and also keeping what we're going to call the continuous improvement plan. Refers to it as a strategic plan, but it's really the continuous improvement, knowing where your gaps are and what you need to be working on going forward. And then standard 10 in the manufactured program standards is a laboratory. Having a laboratory and knowing what their capabilities are, or multiple laboratories and knowing what their capabilities are, and then also having, as we work forward, having those working toward accreditation and ultimately accredited. That just kind of gives you a little overview. We haven't really talked about what those were as far as the standards, but they're very important to us. We're seeing real-world results here going forward every day. Not in addition to states making progress with the program standards. Another area we're seeing progress on is collaboration. We're seeing a lot more sharing of resources between our states. A good example would be some of our systems that we're using. We're seeing a good Iowa-specific example is the state of Pennsylvania built an inspectional and licensing system. Now, I think there are 4 states that are using it actively, and I think another 4 or 5 or 6 in the process, depending on the day of the week and how it's going. That's a good example of we're able to leverage someone's resources, add a little bit more to the puzzle, and then build something out that really is pretty amazing. And we probably wouldn't have been able to do that a few years ago had we not started this information sharing. We're seeing similar things in training and education of our staff. If you look at my policies and procedures, you're going to see that I didn't reinvent the wheel. I looked at my colleagues across the country. I've used those sessions that when we come together every year to find, oh, I really like how North Carolina is doing this piece. Hey, Wisconsin has a great idea here, and use those things going forward to implement program standards. And then we also see that our relationship, I think, with our federal partners is improving every day, largely because we're able to look and see those system issues and not have a system thought of where it's us versus them, but it's how do we work together to make this better. We've really moved to a public health mentality versus, some sort of perhaps territorial mentality. Those are kind of the things that I really wanted to talk to on behalf of the Alliance, and we had a pretty interesting year this year moving forward with our first recommended set of changes. As the FSMA rules are finalized, we're going to have another big set of changes in about 3 years as that all happens. But this is an evolutionary process for us. But I think if you were out there in the field, and I hope you as our regulatory partners, or as our regulated partners, are seeing that there's some pretty huge progress in the inspectional quality that's happening in the field at the state level, along with the cooperative effort between our state and federal partners.